Mia thought she had escaped. After months of manipulation, fear, and emotional turmoil, she finally packed her bags, left the man she once loved, and moved into a tiny apartment where she could start over. But Ryan wasn't ready to let her go. What Mia didn't realize was that leaving him would only push him to the edge, and once he was pushed too far, nothing would stop him from getting her back, even if it meant destroying everything in his path. At first, Mia and Ryan's relationship seemed like something out of a fairy tale. They met in college, a casual encounter at a mutual friend's party, where Mia was immediately drawn to Ryan's easy charm and confident smile. Ryan, for his part, seemed equally captivated by Mia's warmth and intelligence. They clicked instantly, sharing a sense of humor and common interests that made every conversation feel effortless. It didn't take long for their connection to deepen. By the time they graduated, they had already moved in together, and to everyone around them, they appeared to be the perfect couple, young, successful, and in love. Ryan was the kind of man people admired. He was a software engineer at a well-known tech company, often praised for his innovative ideas and work ethic. He had a sleek, polished persona, and friends often commented on how lucky Mia was to have found someone like him. He was caring, attentive, and seemed to adore her. In public, they were inseparable, taking weekend trips, attending parties, and sharing social media posts of their adventures. Mia felt safe and loved, basking in the glow of their seemingly perfect life. But over time, things began to change. At first, it was subtle, small, almost unnoticeable shifts in Ryan's behavior. He would comment on the way Mia dressed, sometimes making her feel self-conscious about her appearance. "Are you sure that's the outfit you want to wear? You know, you could be getting more attention than you want," he'd say with a chuckle, but it was always laced with an undertone of concern, or was it control? Mia brushed it off as nothing, convincing herself it was just Ryan being protective, just his way of looking out for her. She knew he cared, and maybe he was just a bit insecure. But as time went on, the little comments became more frequent. Ryan started questioning Mia about where she was going and who she was with. At first it felt like concern, but the more it happened, the more it felt like an invasion of her privacy. When she went out with friends, Ryan would ask for constant updates, checking in with her multiple times during the night. Mia tried to reassure him, telling him there was nothing to worry about, but each time she did, she could sense his anxiety growing. It wasn't just concern anymore, it was possessiveness, as though Mia belonged to him and him alone. At home, things started to get tense. Ryan's temper, once reserved for rare moments of stress at work, began to surface more often. Mia would forget to pick up groceries or be a few minutes late from her evening jog, and Ryan's reaction was swift and intense. He would raise his voice, accusing her of being careless or disrespectful. The arguments were quick and sharp, often followed by moments of silence where Mia would feel the weight of Ryan's cold stare. She wasn't used to this version of him. The man she had fallen for seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone who made her feel uneasy and, at times, afraid. Despite the unsettling changes, Mia stayed. She kept telling herself it was just a phase, that Ryan was stressed with work, or that maybe she was overreacting. She loved him, after all. She wanted to believe the best in him. But deep down, a part of her knew something was off. The constant questioning, the sudden outbursts, and the creeping feeling that she couldn't do anything right were starting to weigh on her. But she couldn't bring herself to face the reality that the man she thought she knew, the man she thought she loved, was turning into someone she didn't recognize. And she certainly couldn't bring herself to admit that her relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed. So, she continued to smile, continued to pretend, while the cracks beneath the surface deepened with every passing day. Mia knew she had to leave. The constant tension, the growing fear in her chest whenever Ryan entered the room, the feeling that she was constantly walking on eggshells, it had all become too much. What had started as small signs of possessiveness and control had now turned into a suffocating reality. Mia felt trapped in a relationship she no longer recognized, and no matter how much she loved Ryan or how hard she tried to rationalize his behavior, she could no longer ignore the fact that she was losing herself. She spent weeks planning her escape in secret. The first step was gathering the things she needed. She quietly withdrew small amounts of money from their joint account, trying to keep it under the radar. Her credit card statements, which had always been a casual matter before, were now something she studied closely. Mia knew Ryan could easily access them, and she feared he would notice if she made a large withdrawal or purchase anything out of the ordinary. So she took small steps, getting enough for the deposit on a new apartment, a few essentials, and the cost of transportation. She also made sure to retrieve important documents, her passport, her birth certificate, any old identification, and stored them in a place where Ryan wouldn't find them. Mia's plan was to leave quietly, with as little disruption as possible, and start over in a new city. She'd already found a small apartment just outside of town, far enough away from their old life that Ryan wouldn't be able to find her immediately. It was a tiny space, but it would be hers. She had already secured a job as a barista at a local cafe, and although it wasn't much, it was a start. She could do this. She could escape. But Ryan had started to notice the subtle changes in her behavior. He had always been a bit obsessive, keeping a close eye on her movements, but now his suspicions were starting to get the best of him. Mia's late nights at the library, the extra hours she was spending working on her computer, it was starting to feel like an excuse. His questions became sharper, more direct, until finally he confronted her. Mia tried to stay calm when he asked why she had been acting so distant. She made up a story about being stressed at work, about needing some space to unwind. But Ryan wasn't buying it. He started to get angry, accusing her of being secretive, of keeping things from him. The familiar feeling of dread washed over Mia, and she knew then that her plan was in danger of falling apart. The night before she was supposed to leave, Ryan sat her down in the living room. His face was tight with a mixture of frustration and hurt, and his voice trembled as he spoke. He begged her to stay, swearing that everything would be different. He promised that he would work on himself, that the controlling behavior would stop, and that they could fix everything. Mia could see the desperation in his eyes, the tears that threatened to fall, and for a moment she wavered. The guilt inside her grew unbearable. How could she leave him like this? Hadn't she made a commitment? Didn't she owe it to him to try to make things work? Maybe she was just overreacting. Maybe it wasn't as bad as she thought. But then she remembered the fear, the way she had begun to feel small, invisible, like she didn't even have control over her own life anymore. She remembered the times when she had to walk on eggshells, fearing his sudden bursts of anger. She remembered the way he would suffocate her with his constant need to know her whereabouts, to track her every move. Mia's heart was heavy with the realization that things could never go back to how they once were. She couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She had already lost herself in the relationship, and if she didn't leave now, she wasn't sure she would ever find herself again. But in the end, Mia stayed. She couldn't bring herself to hurt Ryan, couldn't bear the thought of tearing their life apart. She convinced herself that she owed him another chance. She promised herself that if things didn't improve, she would leave for good. The guilt of leaving him so abruptly felt overwhelming. And so, against her better judgment, Mia stayed. But deep down, she knew it was a mistake. The warning signs were too obvious now, and even though she tried to convince herself that things would change, a part of her knew that she was only delaying the inevitable. As the weeks passed, Mia's fear grew stronger. She had stayed, hoping things would improve, but instead they only got worse. Ryan's outbursts became more frequent, more intense, and more unpredictable. The loving, attentive man she had once known was slipping further away, replaced by someone who was increasingly controlling and angry. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, and Mia wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her balance. It started with small things. Ryan began making cruel comments about her appearance, often criticizing her weight or the way she dressed. "You're not the same girl I met," he'd say, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've let yourself go." Mia would smile weakly, trying to brush it off, but each comment chipped away at her self-esteem, making her feel unattractive and undeserving of love. She had always taken pride in her appearance, but now it felt like Ryan was systematically tearing her down. At first, Mia had tried to defend herself, telling Ryan that he was being unreasonable. But it was never enough. He would accuse her of overreacting, of being too sensitive. He'd say, "I'm just trying to help you," or "I'm just concerned about you." The words sounded caring at first, but Mia could feel the manipulation beneath them. Slowly, her confidence withered, replaced by doubt and insecurity. She began questioning every decision she made, wondering if Ryan was right, if she was really the one who was wrong. And then there were the constant arguments. Mia had once prided herself on being calm and rational, but now every disagreement felt like an explosion waiting to happen. Ryan would fly into a rage over the smallest things, leaving a dish in the sink, taking too long to respond to a text, or forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning. His temper was becoming uncontrollable. The yelling, the slammed doors, the way his fists would clench in frustration, it was all escalating. The anger that once felt isolated to rare moments now seemed to be a permanent fixture in their home. Mia could feel the walls closing in around her. She tried to keep busy, to focus on work or spending time with friends, but Ryan's demands were constant. He wanted to know where she was at all times. If she didn't pick up the phone right away, he would bombard her with texts or calls, each one more frantic than the last. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What's going on?" he'd ask, his tone dripping with suspicion. The pressure was suffocating. Mia felt like she had no room to breathe, no space to simply exist without feeling like she was constantly under scrutiny. The breaking point came one evening after an argument over something trivial, whether or not Mia had texted him back fast enough. The conversation quickly escalated, Ryan accusing her of not caring about him, of being too distant. Mia, exhausted and emotionally drained, tried to explain that she was just busy, but Ryan wasn't listening. His face turned red with fury, and he began to shout at her. His words stung, cutting through her defenses like a knife. "You're just like everyone else, aren't you? You think you can do whatever you want and I'll just sit here and take it. You don't appreciate me, you don't care about me, and I'm sick of it." Mia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. His words, once so full of love, were now venomous. It was as though every ounce of affection had drained from him, leaving only anger and resentment behind. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. But the worst part was the way she had begun to shut down. She had learned that no matter what she said, no matter how much she tried to calm him down, it never worked. It always ended the same way. Ryan would storm off, leaving her alone to pick up the pieces of whatever had just happened. That night, as Ryan fell silent, pacing back and forth, Mia finally reached the breaking point. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when every day felt like an emotional battlefield. The weight of it all was too much. For the first time, Mia realized she had no control over her own life anymore. She was no longer the person she had been when she moved in with Ryan, full of hope and confidence. She had become a shell of herself, constantly second-guessing every action and every word, afraid of making him angry, afraid of being alone. The realization hit her hard. She couldn't stay. But even as she made the decision, a deep sense of fear gripped her. Leaving him wasn't just about ending their relationship. It was about breaking free from his grasp, from his hold on her every thought and emotion. She wasn't sure if she could do it, but she knew she had to try. Mia's decision to leave was not an easy one. The weight of it pressed down on her every day, and the more she thought about it, the more overwhelming it became. She had already been planning her escape for weeks, but now the reality of actually going through with it seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Ryan's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and Mia knew she had to get away before things escalated further. But she was afraid. Afraid of what Ryan might do if he found out. Afraid of the consequences of leaving. Afraid of the unknown. She spent sleepless nights working on her plan. Every detail needed to be perfect, every movement calculated. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She had already found a small apartment in a neighboring town, away from Ryan's watchful eyes. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, but it would be her own. She could start fresh, rebuild her life. In the mornings, she would go for walks by herself, pretending to be completely normal, while in the back of her mind, she was mentally preparing for the hardest thing she had ever done. Mia started gathering her belongings in secret, packing a suitcase with only the essentials. She took her most important documents, her passport, ID, birth certificate, and hid them in a small bag at the bottom of her closet, making sure Ryan wouldn't find them. Every night she would creep into the living room, pretending to be absorbed in a book or watching TV while she made lists in her mind of everything she still needed to do. She had already set up a new bank account under a different name, but the money she had saved was barely enough to cover her first month's rent and expenses. Still, it was something. She had a friend, Lena, who had agreed to help her with the move. Mia told her she would need her help to get a few things to the new place, but she didn't tell her the full story. Lena didn't know the extent of the situation with Ryan. Mia had kept it hidden for so long, not wanting to admit to anyone just how bad things had gotten. She didn't want to be seen as weak or helpless, but the truth was she was both. And now she needed help. The night before she was supposed to leave, Mia felt a pit in her stomach that she couldn't shake. She had planned it all, calculated every detail, but something felt off. Ryan had been acting more suspicious than usual. He was watching her more closely, asking more questions, and she could see the unease growing in his eyes. It was as if he knew she was about to do something, though she hadn't given him any real reason to suspect anything. She tried to play it off, pretending everything was fine, but every time she looked at him, she could feel the tension building. Around midnight, after Ryan had fallen asleep, Mia grabbed her bag and slipped out of their bedroom. Her heart was racing, her mind in overdrive. She had to be quick. She tiptoed around the house, making sure not to wake him. Each step seemed louder than the last. Each movement felt like it could give her away. But she couldn't back out now. She called Lena and told her it was time. The moment was here. Lena agreed to meet her at the apartment and help with the final steps of the move. Mia didn't have time to explain everything in detail. There was no time for that. She grabbed the rest of her things, holding her breath, praying Ryan wouldn't wake up. But just as she was about to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. "Where are you? What are you doing?" Panic seized her. She froze, staring at the screen, her mind racing. Ryan was awake. He knew something was wrong. He was coming after her. The sense of dread that had been building in her for months now exploded in full force. Mia knew she couldn't wait any longer. If she didn't leave now, she wasn't sure she would ever have the chance. She quickly gathered her things, grabbed her bag, and made her way out the door. As she stepped into the night, she could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The car ride to the apartment was a blur, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, the streets outside blending into a haze of lights and shadows. Every mile felt like an eternity, but every mile also brought her closer to freedom. She was scared, terrified even, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, she could breathe. She wasn't trapped anymore. But even as she drove away, her phone continued to buzz, each message from Ryan more frantic than the last. "Where are you? What's going on? Why won't you answer? The constant barrage of texts made Mia's heart race even faster. But she kept driving, knowing that if she stopped now, it would all be over. Ryan would find her, and she would be right back in the same suffocating life she had fought so hard to escape. As she neared the apartment, a deep sense of unease settled over her. She had no idea what Ryan would do when he realized she was gone. Would he come after her? Would he follow her? Mia didn't know, but she had made her choice. There was no turning back now. Mia arrived at the small apartment just as the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The city was quiet, almost empty at this hour, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. She parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the entrance. She was finally here. Free, or so she thought. The weight of the decision hit her all at once, the culmination of months of fear, doubt, and planning. She had left. She had actually left. And yet, a deep, gnawing fear still lingered at the back of her mind. It was as if, despite the relief, she could still feel Ryan's presence, watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. Mia's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Ryan, sent just moments after she had driven away. "I know what you're doing. You can't run away from me." Her breath caught in her throat. The words were cold, threatening in their simplicity. She had hoped for more time to settle in, to breathe, to regroup, but now she was certain Ryan wasn't going to let her go that easily. He had known she was planning something. Maybe it was the way she had been acting the past few weeks, or maybe he had sensed her growing distance. Either way, he had figured it out, and now he was coming after her. Mia quickly turned off her phone and dropped it into her bag, hoping the distraction of ignoring him would help calm her nerves. She grabbed the few things she had brought with her and walked inside the building, her footsteps echoing through the hallway. The apartment was small, nothing like the life she had left behind, but it was hers. She didn't need anything extravagant, she only needed a place to breathe, a space where she could start again. She unloaded her things quickly, setting up a small corner with the essentials: a bed, a few clothes, and the few personal items she had managed to bring with her. The rest of her life, her books, photos, and all the little things she had accumulated over the years remained in the past, left behind in a hurry. It didn't matter now. She had to focus on surviving the next few hours, the next few days, until she was sure Ryan wasn't going to track her down. The first day in the apartment was unsettling. Mia spent most of it in a fog of fear, constantly glancing out the window, checking her phone, and listening for sounds outside. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but the anxiety gnawed at her like a persistent, irritating buzz. Every little noise, the creak of a door, the hum of a car passing by, made her jump. She kept thinking of Ryan, of the last words he had said to her. "You can't run away from me." The next few days passed in a haze. Mia kept to herself, going out only when she had to. She worked at the cafe, kept her head down, and made as few connections as possible. Every interaction felt like a risk. Every person she talked to felt like a potential link to her past, a thread that could unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. She didn't talk to anyone about why she had left. She didn't explain that her life had been controlled, suffocated, that her every move had been scrutinized by someone who had once claimed to love her. It was a few days later when the knock came. The sound at the door jolted her out of a light sleep, her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly stood, her legs trembling beneath her. She hadn't expected him to find her so soon. She pressed her back to the wall, listening. It wasn't like Ryan to give up quickly, but the thought of him showing up here at her new place made her stomach turn. She crept to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she turned back to the apartment, she caught a glimpse of something outside her window. A figure standing across the street, watching. Her pulse quickened. Ryan was here. He had found her. She ran to her phone and dialed Lena's number, her hands shaking as she heard the dial tone. It rang and rang and rang until the voicemail kicked in. Mia hung up and tried to calm her racing thoughts, but there was no escaping the reality Ryan had tracked her down. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. Mia locked the windows, drew the blinds, and sat in the dark, holding her breath, waiting for him to make his next move. Her mind raced. What would happen if he found her? Would he break down the door? Would he try to drag her back? She couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she fought, Ryan would always be there, lingering in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. Hours later, just as she was about to collapse from exhaustion, a text came through from Lena. "Are you okay?" Mia's hand hovered over the screen, and for a moment she hesitated. She wanted to explain everything, to tell Lena the truth, but the words didn't come. Instead, she typed back, "I'm fine. Just need some time." For now, it was all she could do. The silence of the apartment surrounded her, and as the night stretched on, Mia finally allowed herself a single, shaky breath. She wasn't sure how long it would last, but for the first time in weeks, she was alone, just herself, and the quiet hum of the night. But even in the silence, she knew Ryan was still out there, and he wasn't going to let go that easily.